Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 7th edition of Impact Matters, a webcast with cutting-edge thinkers and change agents on the topic of impact. I'm Amy Hall, founder and president of Impactorum, a coaching and advisory service for sustainability and CSR professionals. With me are Sienna Spitzer and Anela Doisich, who are helping to facilitate this webcast. I'll turn it over to Anela.
Hi everyone, I'm Manella and I am here as always behind the scenes helping manage some of the logistics and the Q&A along with Sienna today. So before we start, I wanted to mention a couple of things. Along the bottom of your screen, you should see both a chat and a Q&A function. If you want to submit a question, please do so through the Q&A. We're going to hold about 15 minutes at the end of the call to answer as many questions as we can live. Otherwise, feel free to use the chat throughout if you want to connect or discuss with anyone else that's on the call. We're actually going to have Sienna helping facilitate some chat, so look out for some messages from her there. One important thing to mention though, if you are using the chat function, your current default setting is set to send your messages only to all panelists. In order for everyone that's on the webcast to see your message, you're actually manually going to have to change that so it's set to send to all panelists and attendees. So when you go into your chat box, just look right above and you'll see there's a little option to toggle onto all panelists and attendees. Okay, thank you, and I will catch up with you guys later on in the Q&A section.
Thank you, Anela. And now I'd like to introduce today's guests. I'm super excited for today's conversation, given it's super early in 2021, and we have so much opportunity ahead to make this year really count. My guests, Christen Brandt and Tammy Tibbetts, are the co-founders of She's the First, a global organization whose vision is a world where every girl chooses her own future and where every girl is educated, respected, and heard. Christen and Tammy are also co-authors of the hot off the press book entitled Impact, a step-by-step plan to create the world you want to live in. I had the enormous pleasure of attending their Zoom book launch party a few weeks ago and was completely transported by the joy and positive intention they both brought to it. So it's my honor to welcome Tammy and Christen to Impact Matters.
Thanks, Amy.
I see you showing up. There you are. Welcome. So people often talk about New Year's resolutions. Here we are, January 14th, 2 weeks in. We have a love-hate relationship with New Year's resolutions. Some people have success, some don't. I personally have already broken mine, which my New Year's resolution was to exercise every day of this year. And then I hurt my back last week. It's all better now, but I had to take 3 days off. So now I'm bummed. So before we get into this, I want to mention to the audience, if anyone has actually made a New Year's resolution, please feel free to drop it in the chat and we can take a look. So Christen or Tammy, why is it important for us to be having this conversation today at the beginning of 2021? Is there a connection between what you talk about and making resolutions?
Yeah, I think that there is. And a lot of this comes from our desire periodically to make sure that our actions are in line with our values. And I think that impact really plays a large part for what many of us consider to be our most sacred values to ourselves, the most important values to ourselves. And yet it often ends up being that when we make our resolutions, we tend to make them about our fitness, about our diets, sometimes about our career goals, but our impact goals often aren't part of that goal setting structure. And we think, and we make the case, that a lot of that is because there just simply isn't a lot of information out there on how to create an impact, on how to create impact goals that you can really achieve. And so we want to make that gap just we just want to fill it in. We want to make it a lot easier for the ordinary, everyday person to recognize that creating impact goals is something that you can and should do on a regular basis, and that it's extremely accessible. It doesn't have to be a big, scary goal.
So there was a really fun quote in your book, which was told by James Frick, some famous person that I didn't recognize. Don't tell me where your priorities are. Show me where you spend your money, and I'll tell you what they are. I think that really gets to what you were just talking about, kind of making sure our actions are aligned with our values. And we may think we know what we want, but actually what we're doing in real life is very telling. Tammy, how has this shown up for you in your life? You're muted.
For me, the reflection piece is so important. Like, that has to go hand in hand with resolutions or intentions, whatever you want to call them. As Christen knows, like, I love the spirit of a new year and the energy around really reflecting on what my goals are going to be for the year ahead. And I have many different ways in which I do this. The impact plan is one of them, and that kind of fits into monthly resolutions. And I sit down and think what I want to, and everything that feels big, I try to break it down into small steps. And I think what is reassuring, I hope is reassuring to a lot of people, if you're new to approaching your impact journey in an intentional way, we would bet that you probably, with professional goals that you have or lifestyle fitness goals that you have, you've probably taken a similar mentality. So now we're just trying to apply that to an aspect of your life that chances are has been very reactive, that something went wrong in the world or someone approached you and asked you to give. And because you are a caring person, you said yes, but then you ended up saying yes too many times and spreading yourself thin and feeling like you haven't accomplished anything. So Christen and I kind of want to get at, help you be more proactive, and instead of a resolution per se, choose a North Star, something that can really guide your path over a lifetime, and then work backwards to assess what you have to offer based on your own unique talents, skills, resources. And then we show you how to plug that into what the world or your community needs, so that you can, as Christen said, really feel proud that you're living a life and taking actions that are in alignment with your beliefs.
So before we get into kind of the meat of the book, I'm curious a little bit about your organization that you two co-founded. I wonder if you wouldn't mind just taking us, sharing us with us a little bit about that, and maybe how that led you to this idea about the book.
Of course. We launched She's the First 11 years ago in 2009. And at the time, we intended for She's the First really to be a media campaign. Tammy and I did not set out to become nonprofit executives. This is just something that we wanted to do to make the world a better place. We saw that there was incredible work happening for girls' rights and girls' education all around the world. And we wanted to be able to connect people who wanted to create change in that sphere with the opportunity to do so. And so She's the First was really born of the fact that there were people who really wanted to create change, and the fact that they weren't really sure how to do it. And so you'll see a parallel there then in how Impact as a book came to be. Because through the years, because we were social entrepreneurs, and I think especially because we were young social entrepreneurs at the time, I was still in college, Tammy was just out of college when we first launched, we got a lot of people coming up to us asking us how they could do the same. Either they wanted to launch their own project or campaign, or they just wanted to make sure that they were creating change, they were creating a difference, and they weren't really sure where to start or how to know if they were doing something effectively or where they should even go for advice. And so they would often come to us, whether through the info box for She's the First or at speaking engagements, and that this question of where do I start? How do I make a difference? Just kept coming up. And the truth is that, even if we wanted to, we just couldn't possibly have the time to walk everyone through this process of figuring out their North Star, figuring out, what is it that you have to give uniquely? What are your skills and your talents and your resources? And then how do you map that all up with what the world needs? But we did think that we could use the formulas that we had learned in the nonprofit world, and we could use all the experience we had gained through running this nonprofit for a decade to create a framework and to create this really step-by-step plan and guide to help people find their own way. So Tammy mentioned that kind of Venn diagram of matching up what you have to give with what the world needs. That's really what the book walks you through. And it's because we wanted to help people answer that question for themselves of how can they make a difference? Where do they start? What will their legacy look like? And this walks them through that.
So I read the book myself and I really loved it. I'm really not a big fan of kind of self-help books or motivational reading, but I went through this book so easily. It was completely accessible. It was really easy to follow the kind of the guides, the prompts that you offer. There were sample worksheets in the back. There were all kinds of examples given. And so I went through and created my own impact plan, which is sort of kind of funny because I've already been in a career of so-called impact for quite a long time. And I wondered if it would tell me anything new. And I might share with you a little about what came up for me. You already mentioned this idea of North Star and how to think about your North Star. And actually, how do you define North Star before I share with you what my North Stars were?
So your North Star is the world that you want to see. So if you were to think, I want to live in a world where blank, what do you put in that blank? What is that vision? It's kind of where your purpose meets vision.
So I want to live in a world where blank, fill in the blank. Okay. So when I sat down to write that for myself, I ended up with 3 completely unrelated sentences, where climate change is under control, where ethical and environmentally conscious business is the norm, and where people from different races, ethnicities, and genders live in complete harmony. So then I thought, oh my God, I've got 3 different North Stars. What do I do with that? But luckily, you had a solution. And, you talked about kind of this idea of feeling where you're, I can't remember exactly how you describe it, but really feeling where you're drawn, where you are most naturally pulled to, I guess. You use some other phrases in the book, like ikigai. Am I saying that right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. One thing I just want to respond to what you said, Amy, is that reminding people issues don't exist in silos. And that's something that, we need to acknowledge is don't feel like your North Star has to literally state every single thing you care about, but it's like an anchor where, for example, my North Star about a world where women and girls have resources and opportunities to pursue their dreams. Education is a huge part of that for me personally, tying to my background of being a first-generation college graduate. My North Star doesn't necessarily spell out education and entrepreneurship and all these other issues, but you can see how they fit beneath that and fit together. So that's something else that you can explore.
Oh, that's good. Thank you.
The other, as we also overlap that we're talking about, is with what you are passionate about and what needs there are in your community or in your country or in the world at large. And we are big proponents of following where that passion leads you. I think there's another school of thought with impact. It's that, much more down to the dollar. Where can you stretch your dollar the furthest? And it's much more analytical, spreadsheet driven. And while that is interesting information to know, we feel if that's not, if providing bed nets to prevent malaria isn't what makes you jump out of bed in the morning and sign up to give and volunteer, then leave that to someone else who has that passion. there's a lot of kind of guilt or shame that people experience when they pick a certain area. And for saying yes to something, they're saying no to a whole bunch of other things. But that's actually a strength more than a shortfall or a weakness. And that's something that Christen and I really want you to own, that there is strength and effectiveness and impact in choosing a lane for yourself that really excites you, so that when the going gets tough, because it does get tough the deeper you get into change making, you still want to keep going because you care about it that much and it's that personal to you.
Thank you. That was so helpful. You know, I think this idea of having, of wanting to do everything, or being worried that that your goal isn't lofty enough or meaningful enough or something like that. You have this ability in this book to break down the strategies towards getting to your goal in a way that makes it totally doable. You have the things that you can do right now, easy, you know, low-hanging fruit, and then you have the longer term things that take a little more planning. You have medium and then long term. And I just felt so, I just felt really safe, I guess, in stepping into this and not feeling like I was biting off more than I could chew, or that it was this big, hairy, what's that, the BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal. That just seems completely unattainable. So what kind of feedback have you gotten? And I wonder if you have heard from anybody who's actually created their own impact plan and has started acting on it.
Yeah, so it's really thrilling to hear you cite that kind of practicability of the plan as one of the strengths, because it's something we worked really, really hard at. I would say, you know, people who have written books will tell you how hard writing a book is. I think we hear about this a lot from authors, and everything you've heard is true. There are a lot of elements of it that are quite difficult, but I think that one of the things that really drove us throughout the process, and that kept bringing us back to the whiteboard, so to speak, was making sure that every step of the way, number one, made sense, number two, was accessible, and number three, left room for people to be their whole selves. So in other words, Tammy mentioned these concepts of shame and guilt that often comes up with impact work. A lot of that comes up around the idea that, you know, if I am paying attention to animals, for example, if being a voice for animals and animal welfare is something that motivates me to wake up in the morning and do my volunteer work, or to sign up for a shift or donate, that I need to feel bad because I'm not paying attention to, or I'm ignoring climate change or gender equity issues or racial issues or all of these other pieces. And what we realize is that a change maker who is frozen with guilt is not going to help us create this world that we are all moving toward, this kind of better world for all of us. Mm-hmm. And so it's better to have a system that gives you the grace and the space to make mistakes, to learn from them, to do what is achievable and accessible to you as an individual, and trust that if we are all doing that, if we are all working toward our North Stars, that as a whole is going to create this better world all around us. And we have to have a lot of trust in that. But no single individual is ever going to be able to create that vision of a world that we're all working toward and that we're all fighting for. You cannot do it, right? So whether you're Amy or Tammy, you cannot take all of that on yourself and reasonably expect that you can do it. And so instead, if you just focus in on this one area that you are connected to, that you have the resources and skills to really make a meaningful difference in, you're going to find that shows greater rewards. And for feedback, one of the best ways that we've been receiving feedback actually is through friends of readers who have gotten the book. So, you know, we have a folder going of some of the feedback and emails and things that we've received. And one of our kind of favorite themes that we're seeing emerging is that someone will purchase the book and then still they haven't read it now because it has been passed around their family, because their mom has picked it up and gotten into it and handed it over to their dad. And, one of their friends saw it when they came over and picked it up. And we love that, because that too, having a family system, having a group of friends who are all working toward your impact plans together, whether they're in alignment or they're in kind of different impact areas, that's what we want to see. And we want to see kind of how all of that starts linking together and pushing us forward.
You're reminding me a little bit about coming from the workplace, this idea of the sustainable development goals. There's so many. And, how can we as a individual company, brand, workplace, organization, tackle all of them? And then immediately you feel guilty because, you're thinking about, just 2 or 3 of them on any given day. And so what I'm taking away is, let's forget the guilt. Let's just honor what we can do, what we have control over, what moves us, where we can contribute meaningfully, and own that space.
Exactly.
So you guys are both in careers. You run an organization that is all about impact, right? Have you also made your own individual impact plans based on this book? And is it different than what you're doing?
Yeah, we have. It's really reassuring just to have it on paper, because while She's the First is like my life, it's my job, it's my legacy, I love it so much, it's not all of me, and there's more that I want to do personally to create an impact geographically closer to me, as well as She's the First is very global. So I've become very active in my alma mater, the College of New Jersey, and I serve on the board of trustees, and with a special focus on their mission fulfillment priorities and inclusive excellence, social justice work. So that's really exciting to me. It's gratifying. It's a great learning experience at the same time that I feel like I can focus in on a population of students who like me are going to be the first in their families to graduate from college. And I know Christen is very active in our community of Brooklyn with mutual aid groups and teaching women self-defense. I think we both, even if you work in a nonprofit full-time, there are still ways outside the scope of your organization's mission that you want to make a difference. So yeah, it is. Christen and I are susceptible to all the same feelings as everyone else, of being overwhelmed, of questioning, like, how are we making the most impact? So honestly, like we do follow our own advice. Anytime we're stepping into a new opportunity or a new arena of impact, especially when, we're maybe not the experts in a certain area. I know for me, like, I've been thinking the past few years of how do I have more of an impact through political action, not just my philanthropic work. And that's where I've really felt like a rookie, like I'm starting from a place with not a lot of prior experience or knowledge. So when we write in the book about how that's okay, because you are a student of impact, you listen to follow the leaders. You don't always have to be the leader. I carry those kind of lessons. We practice what we preach is the shortest way of saying it. And I truly believe, like, no one becomes like a certified impact expert ever. I think each one of us is forever a student of impact, and it is a practice that you have to keep working at.
So we have used the word impact probably 50 times already in the past 20 minutes. So I'm curious if you have a definition for impact. I think lots of people define it differently, and I'm curious what your definition is.
Yeah, I think for us, impact is the positive change you create or that you contribute to. And Amy, you mentioned that throughout the book, we have opportunities for those kind of accessible acts of impact or action steps. We refer to them as everyday impact points. When you use a recyclable straw, or you bring your own mug to the coffee shop, that's your quick everyday impact point for doing something good. And then you have these medium action plans, things that maybe you are delivering groceries every week for a neighbor, or you've signed up for a volunteer shift twice a month, or things that you're doing more regularly that are taking more time, more energy, more resources. And then you have those bigger goals, right? And that might be running a marathon for a nonprofit, or hosting a concert. One day we'll be able to be near other humans again, I'm hoping. Whatever your big audacious goal might be in the realm of impact. And I think it's easy to get caught up, especially in some of the discussion and discourse that's happening today, in actions not being good enough, or that you're not doing enough, and that real impact looks a certain way. And for us, it's just really important that you are doing, and that you're not letting the nerves of doing the wrong thing, or saying the wrong thing, or not doing enough get in the way of doing anything at all. You have to be open to learning and to doing better, but don't let it get in the way of taking that first step.
Well, thank you. While we continue talking, I just want to remind our listeners that to put their questions in the Q&A, so that we can be sure to reserve some time at the end for this, for conversation with Christen and Tammy around your questions. So when I was looking through the website of She's the First, you also talk about impact there. And I love, by the way, your definition, positive change you can create or contribute to. I think that there's something about like that net positive difference that your actions make, which is super exciting and important. You had an example on your website about measuring change in self-esteem among the girls and women that you serve. And I wondered how you do that. This is shifting a little bit away from individual impact to kind of organizational, but it did pique my curiosity. I was just wondering about that.
Yeah, we developed a system of surveys that we worked out with our partner organizations to identify some of the indicators that happen when girls do have high self-esteem versus when they have low self-esteem. And so it's part of an evaluation that girls take part in every year. And they report in on things like whether or not they like to speak up in class, and whether or not they feel comfortable helping a classmate with their homework, and things that aren't so on the nose as to ask them, hey, how is your self-esteem going? But really just does a general check-in on where their confidence is, and where they are feeling more or less secure. And that really helps so that the mentors within our partner programs have a good understanding of where they need to focus. But another big part of measurement that at She's the First we work really hard on with partners, particularly in trainings with community organizations that we work with, is around integrating girls' voices. And whether that's through focus groups or through advisory councils of girls, having a really solid way and an ethical way of being able to ask girls how the program is working for them and for their peers, and where they're seeing strengths and where they're wanting to see more or different. And this is something that we bring up within the book as well, which is that no matter what arena you are working for impact in, it's really important to hear from people who are most impacted by that issue area. So if you're working on hunger in your local community, whether you've had personal experience with hunger or not, it's still really important to hear from those who are experiencing it now, or who might be experiencing it even in a different way than you are, or that your family is, or that your neighbors are, so that you can have a really holistic idea of what is and isn't working and where you can best contribute.
This reminds me of one of our guests over the summer who wrote a book called Real Impact. I'm just standing up so that, Morgan Simon. And she leads a social impact investment firm, and talked about the importance of getting into those communities, into those neighborhoods, not making assumptions, here from the States, about communities that they're investing in South America, Africa, etc., but really hearing from people who were being impacted by those investments, by the I guess what's the word I'm looking for? The actions that were being brought to their communities, and kind of I just want to say kind of the abhorrent feeling about the how many investment firms and change makers out there really don't listen and make broad assumptions from this kind of place of privilege that we occupy, many of us in this country. So I really love that message. And even here in the town that I live in, which is a very diverse town north of New York City, I know that I don't get into other neighborhoods as much as I should. I'm very much, well, now nobody's moving around much, but even in a normal day, without the pandemic, I really need to get out and listen more and integrate more and really be part of the community if I want to contribute meaningfully. So I thank you for that message.
And don't forget, you're also choosing impact partners and nonprofits that are on the front lines with those communities. So, you're not always the one that needs to be knocking on people's doors to ask them about their lives. Sometimes you're just a donor and you're enabling work to happen. So as you're selecting organizations to support, use that as a metric of evaluating them. Do they have voices from the population they serve on their website? Is that reflective in their leadership and on their board? Many times donors are kind of obsessed over overhead as a metric, but honestly, that's not telling you much how much an organization spends on its admin or salaries. Like, as an everyday person, like, you don't know what is needed to achieve the outcomes of that organization. But one thing that you can assess effectively as an everyday citizen is how prominent are those voices and what is the representation like in the organizations or the campaigns that you choose to support.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you so much for that. I'm wondering if we want to ask our audience, first of all, Anela, if there are any questions, and also just to say, given the conversation that we've had, if any of the audience members are thinking about any kind of impact goal that they'd like to consider for their year 2021, the year of impact, we can call it that. And if so, if they would want to put that in the chat box and just share some of the things that are coming up for them as a result of this conversation. I can't see the chat box, so I don't know if that conversation is already happening, so my apologies. So I might ask Anela to unmute and tell us what's going on in the chat world.
Yeah, so there's lots of great things going on in the chat world, so that's great. Love to see everyone interacting. And we do have a question here. So the question is, how do you account for cultural factors in the populations of those you serve and ensure that you're promoting intersectional feminism or womanism and not just elevating a monolithic or static view of feminism?
Great question. And there are two related but slightly different answers to this question through the She's the First lens and the impact lens. So on the She's the First side, the way that we do this is that all of our trainings and all of our work is co-hosted and co-led by local organizations. So what that means is that, first of all, any campaign or program initiative that She's the First is going to put out goes through our board members, which is based internationally, including in and from some of the areas where we do work. It also includes 2 girls board members who have a vote, as well as we have a girls advisory council. And so they have input on whether or not campaign ideas go live, whether or not they are culturally and contextually appropriate, and what else they would want to see from She's the First. So first and foremost, all of our kind of steps in creating this programming is guided with girls. But then from there, as we do training, and we train on feminist mentorship as one of our pillars, as well as sexual and reproductive health and girl-centered design, All of this is done with local facilitators and with local feminist organizations so that we can properly contextualize it. A lot of what we train on and a lot of what we talk about at She's the First isn't actually, here's the foolproof best way to work with girls or to empower them. And instead, it's about the methodologies and the skill sets that you need to thoroughly understand the girls that you're working with and to better serve them. Things like, how do you hold focus groups with girls if you're not a researcher? How do you create leadership positions within your organization for girls to have not just a voice, but a vote? How do you evaluate your programs and whether or not they're actually successful in working for girls? So that way organizations can respond in ways that are appropriate both to their own organizational culture as well as to the larger culture that they're working with. But I would say when it comes to your own personal impact and thinking about, you want to make sure that everything you're doing works for the population that you're working with, the best way to do this is to work within your own community and to work with a North Star that you can personally relate to. So for Tammy and I, our North Stars are related to girls and women in this kind of global sense. For you, it might be something that is hyper-local. It might be global like ours, but it still needs to be kind of ideally tapped into something that you have personal experience with and that you have a personal story with. And then from there, working with others, whether they're activists or leaders or people who are part of the community and communities that you are working with, becomes really, really important as well as a way to guide the ship, so to speak.
Just to follow up on that,
Yeah.
how did you determine initially which parts of the world to work in?
It was going back 10 years. I think it was more organic organizations that we kind of encountered through attending a conference or who reached out to us via their website, and then that opened a dialogue. Moving forward, Christen and the programs team strategy is much more intentional about trying to build hubs where we have kind of clusters of partner organizations, such as in East and West Africa and Latin America, so that they can really experience the benefit of having a peer network of organizations to share their knowledge and learnings with.
Great. And so I think that we're going to be drawing to a close this conversation. I want to remind everybody that the book is Impact. I purchased mine on bookshop.org. I really believe in supporting small booksellers when possible. And if you don't have one near you, bookshop.org does have the book. Any final comments before we close up?
I would just add that, yes, it'd be wonderful if you could read the book. The next step would be if you could share it with others. Christen and I have resources on the website, discussion guides for book clubs. There is the workbook in the back of the book that is more, for an individual to do, but there's another workbook on our website that you could do with a group. So that's kind of our hope, is that this book spreads to become part of book clubs and just that people are experiencing it in the company of others so that you can talk through the exercises together and be accountability buddies.
Mm-hmm. And if you're ever starting to feel that overwhelm, that guilt, just remember our favorite mantra with this book is that no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. So take that with you as well.
No one can do everything, but everyone can do something.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Thank you. Beautiful words to end by. So thank you, Tammy and Christen, for joining us today. Thank you for everybody who tuned in. If anyone wants to find you, your organizational website is she'sthefirst.org and your book website is planyourimpak.com, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Thank you, Anela and Sienna, for facilitating. Please check out our website, impactorum.com, or follow us on Eventbrite for future editions of Impact Matters. We have some more in the planning. And you can find all the past conversations. And then this one will be there too on our YouTube channel, the Impactorum YouTube channel. Thank you everyone for joining us, and happy 2021.